First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is a humanist look at theology. This past week, I was looking at minister and theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who lived from 1892 to 1971. Many people consider Reinhold Niebuhr the most important Christian theologian of the 20th century. And the most important book may or may not be, it's according to who you talk to, published in 1932, Moral Man and Immoral Society, a study in ethics and politics. In that book, he decisively broke with liberal Christianity and liberalism. Dr. Cornel West, one of the most important theologians living today, among others, calls the book the most important work of theology in U.S. history. It certainly is up there anyway, and I think it's a very good book to grapple a little bit with as we think about where has progressivism, liberalism, and liberal religion in general come from, and where is it going today. One concept that we need to think about a little bit is something called Christian realism. Niebuhr is considered one of the founders of Christian realism. Christian realism is, according to Wikipedia, a political theology in the Christian tradition. It's built on three biblical presumptions: the sinfulness of humanity, original sin in the estimation of many Christian theologians, sinfulness of humanity, the freedom of humanity, that would be free will, and the validity and seriousness of the Great Commandment. Christian realism was in part a reaction to the 20th century social gospel movement, a reaction against the social gospel movement, which was considered to be too liberal for many Christians. By the way, the Great Commandment is this, Matthew 22, verses 37 through 40. Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So Christian realism, the sinfulness of humanity, humanity is in a fallen state of sin. The freedom, the free will of humanity to act according to sin or trying to get a little better, and the validity and seriousness of that great commandment. Now, Reinhold Niebuhr said that moral decisions are of three types as a Christian realist. The first kind of moral decision is pathetic. You didn't make a decision. Whatever happened can't be helped. It's an accident. So you can call it pathetic, but we can't consider people free will and responsible for having done that. The second type is ironic, and this is where Niebuhr goes to town, as you'll see in a moment. Ironic moral decisions are people have some responsibility, but the decision is made based in human weakness. Back to that Christian realism idea, it's made through human sinfulness, or sometimes thinking that it's not sinful, but maybe it actually is. That's ironic. And the third type of moral decision is the tragic, consciously taking the less evil of bad choices. No good choices here. Which is the less bad, the less evil of these two? And this then would be a moral choice that is being made consciously rather than unconsciously, and tragically, because we know what we're doing, instead of ironically, in which we think we're doing our best, but we might not really understand what best is. Now, one of the books that Reinhold Niebuhr published is called The Irony of American History, in which he makes these definitions. And a recent book, The Irony of Barack Obama, Reinhold Niebuhr, and the Problem of Christian Statecraft. The book is going to talk about how Obama read Reinhold Niebuhr very thoroughly, as his favorite theologian, and that he knows exactly what this irony, tragic decision-making is about, could he, even knowing it, make tragic rather than merely ironic decisions? Good question. Ironic. Some responsibility is involved, but a decision is made based in human weakness, sinfulness according to Christian theology. Now, I read this last week. This is the introduction to Reinhold Niebuhr's book, Moral Man and Immoral Society. He says this: the thesis to be elaborated in these pages is that a sharp distinction must be drawn between the moral and social behavior of individuals and of social groups, national, racial, and economic, and that this distinction justifies and necessitates political policies which a purely individualistic ethic must always find embarrassing. So not only are we going to make decisions based on sin personally, but even if we're really trying to make moral, ethical decisions, as we expand those decisions into group thinking, we're going to necessarily fall into trouble spots. That's Niebuhr's idea. He goes on to say, as individuals, men, human beings, believe that they ought to love and serve each other and establish justice between each other. As racial, economic, and national groups, they take for themselves whatever their power can command. As a racial, economic, or national group, they take for themselves whatever their power can command. So as individuals, we can believe desperately in a particular set of moral values, that we act according to them in our personal lives. But then when we get in a group, suddenly those good things go away and we're acting merely out of self-interest. He goes on to say, the doctrine that government exists by the consent of the governed and the democratic technique by which the suffrage of the governed determines the policy of the state may actually reduce the coercive factor in national life and provide for peaceful and gradual methods of resolving conflicting social interests and changing political institutions. But, all right, so we've got the consent of the governed, the great democratic idea, but the creeds and institutions of democracy have never become fully divorced from the special interests of the commercial classes who conceived and developed them. It was their interest to destroy political restraint upon economic activity, and they therefore weakened the authority of the state and made it more pliant to their needs. So the bourgeois, the middle class, one, created democracy, got the rules and regulations off themselves, but they are not about to let others in on this freedom, is what Reinhold Niebuhr is arguing here. It must suffice to discount a still widely held conviction that the democratic movement has given society a permanent solution for its vexing problems of power and justice. That is Christian realism, and it's why people still read Reinhold Niebuhr today. Is his very dark vision of humanity and our collective consciousness really true? Can we find a way to stop being ironic in our decisions, more or less self-deluded, and somehow get into the place where we can make tragic decisions? Those would be choosing the less of two evils, which for Niebuhr anyway, most decisions are going to be zero-sum in the game. So Niebuhr, moral decisions are of three types: pathetic, ironic, and tragic. Is the answer for nations almost always necessarily B, ironic? That is the big question. I very much appreciate you listening today. Coffee and Wisdom is on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m. Central Time. And then on Friday, we have a live session on Zoom to discuss these ideas. Definitely, if you'd like that Zoom link or if you want to share any ideas, give me a holler. My email address is minister@firstunitarian.org. Thank you so much for being with me today, and I'll see you on Thursday.